Good, Sam? All right, you know it's going to be a good meeting when HR wants to record it. That tells you they're rather nervous. I know you're all here for the cursing, and I appreciate that. So, for those of you who don't read milk carton backs, I am Glenn Wright. I've been with the company a long time, and I do a lot of stuff in Excel. So, I'm just a practitioner. I'm not a guru. I just use it a lot. And I help people with stuff, and occasionally folks have said, hey, you should run a class. So I got a hold of Sam in HR, and I said, I'd like to help people learn how to make Excel curse aloud. And she goes, dope, let's do that. So that's why we're here today. I have MS, so I fall down a lot. I was in the Navy, so I curse a lot. We're going to try to go 60 minutes without either of those occurring. I know. We'll let Excel do the cursing. So you guys have probably seen the agenda. We're going to go through this stuff relatively quickly. We don't want it to be boring, and as the quote goes, the mind can absorb what the ass can endure. So we'll go fast. So just to set expectations, this is a dog and pony show, right? I'm going to present things that Excel can do. I'm not going to teach you how to do them. You can Google them, the things that are interesting. So that's the point of this class. And secondly, I hope you guys actually pick up a couple of things, whether you're really experienced with Excel or a beginner, a couple of tips to help make your lives easier and get through the day with less pain. Second caveat, again, I'm just a practitioner. There's lots of ways to do things in Excel. There are people in this room who know lots more than I do or different ways to do things. So we're going to cover some basics, some advanced stuff. We're not going to do like VBA programming and advanced pivot tables and all that kind of stuff. So the 15 of you who came for that, you can go ahead and get out now. So we'll go through some foundational stuff first. And again, I realize many of you know this, but if you don't, you'd be like, oh, that's a really cool thing. So just to start, and again, at the end of this, when you go back to your desk, if you want this file, just send an email and I'll send you the file. And so it's all commented, so you don't need to take notes. Everything in it I will send to you, other than the copyrighted material, which HR should.
This all everybody do. You need to pass the list around, Sam.
Yeah, Sam.
I don't know.
I'll just get on you. I love it.
We'll send out. How about we do this? We'll distribute this to everyone who accepted. Does that work?
I can inflict the file on the whole building, yeah.
There we go.
Sure.
There we go.
All right. So we'll go through a few basic things, and I'll try to go quick, because if you already know it, it's boring. If you don't, it's like a magic trick. So a couple of quick keyboard shortcuts. Using the F2 key is a great way to put yourself in edit mode, so you can see when I click on that, it shows what's in the formula. And again, if you already know it, it's useful. It'll also highlight the cell that it's referencing, or cells, so you can't see it because it's cell B999, but if you could, it's highlighted. So it's a quick way to say, gosh, here's another way to get in my cell and re-edit it. Here's how I can see the thing I'm editing. The other thing that's really useful, when you're in edit mode, I don't know if you're familiar with anchors, but you can anchor your cell reference. So right now it's saying, look at cell B999. And if I were to grab this and drag this to the right, whoops, to the right, cool. Learn Control Z, that's step one. Drag this to the right. You know, this cell references B999, this one C999, D99, because we didn't anchor what it was pointing to. So we'll do Control Z again, back the cells out. But you can go back into edit mode. If you press F4, it'll toggle you through. And so when that little dollar sign is in front of, say, the B, it anchors the cell reference on column B. Or B999, it anchors this on B999. So now, when I drag this formula over, it's the same, whoops. See, I failed to do so. Let me do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So now, if I drag this over, all these are going to reference exactly the same cell. Again, it's really useful if you're referencing a wide range of cells and you don't want it to change, or you're referencing one cell and you do want it to change, especially when you're doing drag downs, which will show in a couple of seconds. The second thing I want to show too is just a way to get around really quickly. If you're not already familiar with Control G, think of it as like go to, and there's other things we can do with it, and I'll show you a really cool trick in a second. But essentially, you can do Control G, and it'll allow you, gosh, and I hope you can read this, it'll allow you to either go to a cell reference, like one of these where we've named a cell, or just like a plain cell reference, like that B999, you put that in there, hit OK, and boom, it'll drop us down to the thing that the cell was pointing to, or whatever you typed in, right? fairly straightforward, but again, useful if you want to get around. In addition, anywhere in the spreadsheet, if you do Control G, you can go to anything that has a name, any cell that has a name or any range that has a name, and I'll show you how to do those in a bit. Using Control G, you can just call those up and boom, pop right over to them, which is useful. Say you're looking at a formula and it says, you know, it's referring to something called actual expense. You have no idea where in the spreadsheet that is. So you can use Control G go find that rascal and see what that thing is. All right. Another cool trick, and again, there's not all that much on this sheet to see, but Control Pick will let you see all the formulas that are currently on the sheet you're looking at. Control Pick, what is it called? Apostrophe? Hyphen? Just the one little tilde. Yeah, right here, whatever this is called. It's a useful way, especially if you've got like a bunch of text and a bunch of formulas and you want to see what's there all at once. It's a nice way to just toggle them back and forth. All right, foundational stuff, a little boring unless you know it. One other cool thing, when you're looking at a spreadsheet, often you're looking at somebody else's work and you think there's a bunch of junk here and I want to delete it or change it, and sometimes you don't know what other cells are referencing a cell you're about to edit. See, Ms. Jones, you're nodding your head because you probably ballooned somebody's stuff up. So there's a cool thing Excel can do where you can, where you can go and trace dependents and precedents. And so dependents are things that look into this cell and use it for something. Precedents are things that deliver value to this cell. And so over on the formula tab, there's this thing, trace precedents, trace dependents. And so we can click on that and it'll show you a little line that shows you where things go to or come from. And so for example, if I double click on this, it'll go down to the dependent of this cell. Right? Again, simple stuff, but useful if you haven't already had to deal with it. And last thing I want to show you, because I only recently learned it, there's this thing called Activate. And essentially, it's a quick way to navigate around. You can go down here to where you've got the right and left arrow and right-click on that, and it'll show you all the sheets that are in the workbook. And so on this, it's not so critical because I have really short names, but on any workbook where you've got a lot of long file names, this is awesome because it allows you to pull up all the file names. You can click on one and quickly go to it. So, fun stuff. Woo. Okay, on to
Where'd you click? On that arrow?
Yeah, so when you enable a precedent or dependent, if one is present, it'll show a blue arrow. And often, like say a bunch of cells depend on this one, you'll see just like a tree of blue arrows. It might be hard to follow them all, but it will tell you maybe I should be careful deleting that rascal or changing it. All right, a couple other foundational things. We'll talk about sheets and autofill. We're going to start speeding up. I'm not going to do as much stuff. If you don't already know, worksheets, if you get one set up and you want to use lots of examples of it, say it's something like dealer monthly sales and you got it set up for January, it's really easy to just go down to the tab, right click on the tab name, whatever it is, and you can move them, you can copy them. What's kind of cool is if you get something really good, you can copy it to a brand new workbook or to any other file that's open, you can copy it over and take advantage of it. So a very useful time-saving thing if you built data that you want to replicate. Multisheet, so this is kind of a fun thing, and again, it's most useful when you've got a bunch of worksheets that are the same. So say January through December, or a bunch of dealer sheets where they're all set up the same. Something you can do is do editing and formulas across multiple sheets at the same time. So for example, say on sheets 4 through, 8, I want to change the formatting for cell B1. You notice I went down here and I selected 4 through 8, I go to B1, I go here and I can do some formatting thing. Now every one of those is going to receive the benefit of that formatting thing I just did. So it's a really fast way to format lots of sheets. And the same for formulas. You could put text in there, you could put a formula in there. It's a way to do something on multiple sheets all at the same time. Likewise, you can do formulas that span multiple sheets, which again is really, really useful if you have lots of similar sheets and you've got a same exact value in the same cell. So say you had dealers, some sort of dealer worksheet, dealer workbook, and you've got 12 sheets and each one has a month, and in cell B25 is always sales. You could easily sum up the sales for all 12 worksheets with a formula like this. And you can see it's It's a little different format than you might be used to. Again, Google it to learn the exact details or follow my example, but it's really, really fast and easy to do. It's much easier, say you have 12 worksheets, it's a lot easier than saying equals sum, click on the worksheet A1, plus sum worksheet A2, right? A much, much faster way to do it. Okay, and just in the case you didn't know it, any sort of Excel formula can be combined within another formula. So in this egregious example, and gosh, that's hard to see. There's a way to blow that up, and I don't remember what it was. Can you guys see that well enough to at least accept the fact that I'm probably telling the truth? Okay. If not, move forward, sit by Wayne. He's a friendly person and also has bad vision. But you can combine lots and lots of formulas together. And while it gets hard to read, often it's useful because it means you don't have to do like Formula 1 and then adjust Formula 1 to Formula 2 and then adjust Formula 3 with Formula 4, you just put them all together, right? You can sort of build all these formulas into one by virtue of nesting them. Lastly, we'll talk a little bit about autofill because if you haven't ever used it, it's magic. So here's some things we might want to drag down. And Excel is pretty smart. If you have something that's a series, often it can figure out what that series is and help you fill it in. So rather than having to type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yada, yada, yada. Once you fill in a pattern that Excel can figure out, you can just grab it and drag it down. You don't even need to drag it down. If you have a column to the left of it, you can just highlight the first couple of cells and click it. It's smart enough to do things like months. And the one other thing I'll point out, because imagine you're, say, 2,000, 3,000 rows down. You've got something empty like this, and you know the formula you want or the value you want is at the top of that list. What you can do is just Control up, selecting all those cells, and do Control D, and it'll fill them down. So drag down a formula, copy down a pattern, kind of do autofill for whatever it is you might want to drag down. So again, useful little shortcuts, hopefully save you some time. Okay, let's start to do some funner things. Those of you who are Game of Thrones references will like this. Something Excel can do that's really, really groovy is in addition to having cells named by column and row, you can assign them labels. So, and again, I realize it's probably hard to see, this cell, rather than just being E6, I've named it revenues. And this cell, rather than being E7, I've named it revenues. And that is not all that exciting. What is exciting is the formula in cell E8, which essentially says equals revenues minus costs. And what's cool about these is they work across worksheets. You can only name a cell something once. So if you name it Glenn, you can't name another cell Glenn. But I can be over on worksheet 17 and say equals Glenn plus 2, and the formula will work. Very, very handy, and it makes your formulas a lot easier to read if people are going to have to evaluate them, especially over time, if you're having other people look at your work. And naming these, and I said I wouldn't do this, but I would. This one currently doesn't have a label on it, E8, but it's easy enough to do. I can highlight right here in this little box, type in Wayne. Oops, if I could spell Wayne. And boom, it is in fact named Wayne. I can now use Wayne in a formula, and for those who want to know, Wayne is equal to 23.
Don't I wish?
In addition to naming just a cell, you can do the same thing to a range, right? You can select any set of contiguous cells, highlight them, and do the same thing. In this case, I named it minutes spent fighting, and we have the various characters from Game of Thrones. And so then you can reference that whole range with a name rather than having to say, C11 colon D16. And so it makes setting up things like formulas, and we'll learn how to do these down the road. Formulas then make a lot more sense, right? If we want to say, gosh, let's see how many minutes Arya has spent fighting, it's very easy to do that using this range because we named the thing, rather than saying, C11 to D16. Cool?
Yes.
It's useful stuff. And again, things you reference a lot or things where you have a really complicated spreadsheet, it can make it a lot easier to use and provide a lot of clarity. Okay, and we'll go through this really fast because I think everybody knows the if statement, but if you don't, please learn the if function, right? It says, set up an if, there's some condition, if it's true, do one thing, if it's false, do another. I tell you that only to tell you this. You can nest ifs as well, right? You can evaluate multiple conditions by nesting the ifs. So this is a really somewhat complicated one. But essentially, it wants to look and see, gosh, what day today is, and so the weekday function will return the values 1 through 7, and it also looks at what hour it is right now, and if it's a weekday, say one thing. I'm sorry, if it's the weekend, say one thing. If it's after 12, say something else. If it's before 12, say something else. And so this thing evaluates to the text in green. It is, alas, a weekday afternoon, so we're stuck in 142B listening to Glenn. Okay? So you can nest these things. Another interesting thing with true and false is, Excel itself evaluates them to 1 or 0. Something you might consider doing, especially, say you've got data and you're doing a lot of evaluations against it, you're testing it for lots of conditions, something that can be useful is when you write your ifs, just set it to the result to be 1 if true and 0 if false. And the reason you'd want to do that is then it's pretty easy to count up how many times that condition proved to be true. Which again, with one condition, who cares? But if you're testing lots and lots and lots of things, it's very, very handy because of course you'd use a sum off to the side and you'd sum up those various conditions across the columns. And so here's an example in text where we can then take advantage of the result being 1 or 0 as a result of the if statement. So again, just ideas to plant in your head. And the last thing, sort of related to if, Excel's choose function isn't as good as something we'd find in a traditional programming language, but it is useful when you're getting a result that's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The choose function will take that, that's sort of the input to it, right? So this right here, choose weekday, evaluates to a number, weekday of today evaluates to a number between 1 and 7, and I'm saying as a result of that, return Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Again, this is boring, but if you have like dealer numbers, employee numbers, anything that you can return, so it's first result, second result, third result, this thing can be handy. It's a lot easier than writing a really complex nested if statement, if that makes sense. Okay, we're not quite to the cursing, but we're well on our way. Some useful text functions, and I don't have anything all that smart alecky to say other than these are really, really useful, and you get a lot of stuff out of SAP or business objects, and you only need a portion of it. You only need like the first 30 characters of the dealer's name, or you've got a list of names separated by a comma. I won't go through these in detail other than to say you can grab the left, you can grab the right, you can grab stuff out of the middle, you can go in and find text within text, which can be handy, and then you can do something additional based on it, right? You can even go in and substitute stuff. So using F2, we can say, gosh, I'm looking in cell B3, and I'm looking for the text called text, and I'm changing it to the text named Excel. And when we see the result of that formula, it does indeed change the word text to the word Excel. Yes, ma'am?
So we convert 17-digit PIN to 13. I know there is a site to go to do that, but how can I do that quick in Excel? Because I'm figuring out the first.
Yeah, start by having deer have consistent pins. And I say that, yes, I say that with some of our sarcasm, but it's sort of true, right? That's one of the fundamental problems is we have different pins. The pin structure seems to be different across the enterprise and across time. As long as they're consistent, we can write a formula. Again, I love this stuff, so schedule me for an hour or two and I can help you figure out a way to do it.
I'm going to deal with left, right, mid.
Yeah, you can pull a lot out.
I haven't done it all together, though.
Yeah, but you can rejoin it together because we're about to learn about the concatenate function in a bit.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, keep thinking on it and we'll tell me if we don't hit it. In addition, formatting functions, you can do all of this stuff. So we're just essentially doing, the column C has the formula and column F has the result of that formula. And all of this you can do in Excel with, by clicking on the buttons up here and changing the formatting. So that part is not all that useful. Where it's much more useful though is say you want this somewhere in a chart to display as text, as we're going to see in a minute. If you're doing it there, there's no way to control the formatting without first sprucing it up here. So these formatting things, and in particular, dollar and fixed, are wildly useful. Because you can take something that would be really, really messy and make it look like just a dollar, a normal dollar value to expect to see with dollars and cents. You could round it to dollars. You can have just a single decimal point, 15 decimal points, whatever you want. Dollar and fixed will allow you to control how that rascal looks. I see a few heads nodding. Hopefully that's not sleep coming on. And lastly, dates. Excel dates are pretty messy. First of all, it believes the world was created January 1st of 1900 and just counts up from that. So if you're trying to do your dealer statement from 1897, it'll be a little difficult but not impossible. And so here's a list of some of the functions. We're not going to go through in detail other than to say you can manipulate hours and times, durations, even intervals between things. And so just because it's fun, the now function tells you what time it is right now or the last time you clicked save. These allow you to pull various things out of what the date is right now. You can do some calculations, like if I want to retire at age 67, it's those number of days. Today minus 4/1/2032, 51/19. Sam, I'm not going to make it. Yeah, that's exactly what I said. I looked at. Well, that's not exactly what I said. There's a bunch of these functions. Just keep them in mind. They can be quite useful. This is one that applies, as far as I know, only in our work environment. And if you've ever hit it, you've said all the words we're going to teach Excel to say later. Sometimes pulling things out of business warehouse or business objects, you will get this. Formulas that won't evaluate. When you look at this, and you look up in the bar, and I realize it's hard to see, it's just equal J6 plus J7. There is nothing wrong with that formula. But look, it will not evaluate. Same for this one, same for this one. Anybody ever hit this? And you probably said some choice words. There's a magical fix. I don't know why it works, but it does. Essentially, all you do is do control find and you replace equal with equal. Anybody know that trick?
Yeah, you taught us.
Who I didn't teach. So I'll just to prove that it's sort of true. Equal with equal, replace, and boom, you can see this one evaluated. Again, I don't know why exactly it doesn't work. I don't know why this fix works. Just memorize it, because if you hit it, you'll be very sad, because you've got a perfectly good spreadsheet, perfectly good formulas, and the rascals won't evaluate. There's something about business warehouse or business objects that prevents it from working. And the file documents how to do this, so again, you don't have to remember. Just remember sort of, hey, I remember Glenn mentioned this thing. Okay, Ms. Dolores. If you walk out of here learning only one function, let it be if error. And what if error does is it allows you to trap errors in formulas and do something based on them. And so here's a couple of examples. If I try to add 1 plus 1 plus the text Tim, Excel is going to give me an error, right? Because it's not a valid result. However, if I trap that same formula inside of if error, then I can do something. So if 1 plus Tim doesn't evaluate to something useful, Excel if error function will do something else instead. And so in this case, I'm saying, hey, if whatever I have on the left side doesn't work properly, say the word oopsies. And my daughter's favorite quote. And indeed it does. But we wouldn't have to do that. We could say, this could actually be, a value. It could be a formula. It could be a cell. Wayne, I don't remember if I left you defined. Oh, you're undefined, Wayne. I control Z. But you can set it up to anything. So it's
23.
Yeah, I thought you were 23, but apparently Excel says otherwise. So if you don't know if error, it's really useful for trapping and suppressing errors or doing something different. Displaying a space, putting a different formula, because sometimes you'll even know, gosh, a lot of times this thing is going to blow up, so I just want to use this other formula instead. Highly useful. If you learn one thing, please walk out of here knowing if error, because it's really useful. And then, Dolores, I told you we talk about concatenate, which sounds like a pet, but it's not. What concatenate does is it allows you to paste pieces of text and formulas and whatnot together, right? And mash them together. So usually it's used for text. So in this case, we're combining Abe and Lincoln, and we're putting a comma in the middle. Actually, we're doing Lincoln, comma, Abe, and putting them together. So that's a kind of a logical use for it. But it doesn't have to be just text. You can put formulas in there. You could put Wayne in there. It can combine anything that would make sense, or anything that's potentially displayable. It can do. The other thing about concatenate is you can use the concatenate function. And again, I apologize. I should have blown this up. In the formula bar, you can use concatenate, or you can just use the ampersand as kind of a quicker way to write the same formula. Right? You can just join pieces of text, formula expressions, cell labels like Wayne. It's really useful. I personally use it all the time here, and hopefully you guys will have some some benefit from it. But again, down below, I sort of explain how to use all those things. So we'll go through this part kind of quickly, because you probably know. Say you get roped into going to a JD PAC meeting, and you're supposed to write a report as a result of that, and you happen to go online and you pull all the JD PAC info. You're like, gosh, I'd like to know more about that. There are several functions that allow you to go through, count things, sum things, count things conditionally, sum things conditionally. I'm trying not to lisp. And so, for example, the count formula just counts up the number of cells that contain a number. Relatively useful. The only problem with count is it'll also count zeros, and sometimes you do want to do that, sometimes you don't. And so we start switching over to conditional counting, which would be a count if, right? So you say, count these things as long as they meet a certain condition. So in this case, we're saying, gosh, go through, count all the contributions, provided, and here you see we actually have a greater sign, that they're greater than 0. We could count all the things that are equal to 0, or equal to 712, or equal to Wayne, or you can even do things that are a little more complex, like less than 0, more than Wayne. You can you can conditionally count things. You can even do, so in this case, we're going through, count up all the times we see the word Republican in this long column. And I hid it because it's ugly to see, but it's a way to go through and do that. In addition to looking at just one condition with COUNTIF, you can use COUNTIF-S and look at multiple conditions. So this starts to get really fun. So in this case, we're like, okay, let's count up all the Republicans, all the contribution rows where it's a Republican, but they're not in Iowa. And believe it or not, we do have some Republicans not in Iowa, 77 of them that JD PAC gave a contribution to in whatever time period I pulled the data for. In addition to counting, you can also sum things following similar logic, right? So we're all probably familiar with a simple sum function, but you can do conditional sums using SUMIF. So in this case, we're like, okay, let's go through the data, and every time there's a Republican here receiving a contribution, sum up the amount they got. Further, you don't have to use a simple condition, you can use a complex condition where, let's go through, sum up all the cases where it's a Republican and they weren't in Iowa. And you don't have to, I mean, you could do like 30 different conditions if you had the patience to write that long of a SUMIF, a SUMIF-S. Very, very possible. So it's useful where you've got a chunk of data that might change a lot and you want to pull multiple data elements out of it a lot. If you only want, say you had this data and really you're only going to do a one-time analysis, or you only want to pull one little bit of data, in that case probably a pivot table is better. And I'm not going to get into any detail at all in pivot tables other than to say they can be very useful, but they can also be really, really hard to work with. They're good for what they do. They're good if you're taking like your first look at a hairball of data and you want to try lots of little things and see what shows up. Not as useful if you want to pull data out of there consistently and reliably. Can be done, a bit hard to be done. And the exotic tip for those of you who are familiar with pivot tables, you can actually write formulas within pivots to do some basic functions. So you could count up like the number of Democrats and the number of Republicans in a different column. But it's a pain to do. Don't recommend you do it. Okay. Real briefly, I'll mention hyperlinks because I built them into this just because I thought it'd be a really cool way to navigate around, and then I got bored with it. But hyperlinks allow you to point to other places, either other places within your worksheet or even separate external like websites. And so I put examples, every one of these sheets has a little hyperlink up here. If you click on it, it'll take you back to the index. You can also build in links out to external references. I haven't found much of a use for them. Every once in a while you build a spreadsheet where people need to pop around a lot. You can save them some time by building in hyperlinks rather than forcing them to click on the tab titles. Okay, let's do a little more exotic stuff. We're all probably familiar with the histogram and how you can do basic, by default it's going to fill in a color. If you're feeling particularly offensive, you can do something other than color fills. You can do pictures, right? You can have a picture of your grandkids show up in a histogram or any other type of chart for that matter, just to make it a little bit more visually interesting. It doesn't convey anything valuable, but it might keep people awake. So there is some value to. So if you ever get a chance, click on these rascals and go in and take a look at the different types of fill available to you. You can do more than just the default colors. You can even put it in a pie chart, as I'll show you an example. I have some issues with pie charts, as we'll get to in a bit. But again, kind of what it looks like. And there's different ways to do this. I've yet to find a real practical application or something I'd want to show to Sam Allen, but maybe you would. Okay, corruption in Illinois. We're an Illinois-based company. Like me, you're probably worried about this greatly. That's actually not the reason. I wanted to show you something different you can do with graphs. So say you have some data. Typically, Excel, you've got labels for your columns, and by default, if you make a chart out of that and you do some formatting, it might look something like this, right? It's somewhat useful, but again, we're just grabbing those column headers, so DC, LA, Illinois. The series labels are exactly what Excel says. But you don't have to settle for that. You can cram a lot more useful information into your chart by not using just the raw data that you start with. What I suggest to you is instead do some work, and I don't know what an actual name for these is, I just call them dynamic labels, but you can use formulas or whatever you like to sort of change what the series labels will be or the data labels will be. So now, looking down here, we have rank ordered all the states. So Illinois is actually only the third worst in rank in terms of federal corruption. And we can add in additional stuff, like we added in the text total, but only for the first one using a formula. Whoops. Sorry. And we added the total number of convictions over this period as part of the actual chart itself. So now we're able to cram more data. In addition, we added the word M for millions to this series label, and we even put the result of a couple of formulas in this series label. So we don't have to put it in the chart, but we can cram additional data there without having to have some separate element that displays it. So again, a way to put more useful, or at least condense additional information inside of your charts. I do this all the time. Very, very useful. And remember before we talked about the fixed and the dollar signs, the fixed and the dollar functions? This is where you really want to use them, because this would round. I mean, this max and this mean would probably display 30 digits if I didn't apply a fixed function to it first. So fun, interesting things you can do with your charts, as well as realize that, gosh, in terms of federal corruption, Illinois is only third worst, well behind DC and Louisiana. Okay, Kardashians are everybody's favorite. So first, I want to introduce the idea of a 3D histogram. I'll show you just a couple of examples. So again, just like the bar chart we saw earlier, rather than one series, there's 3 series. And so when the data are orderly, as in this example, and I hope this is displaying well, pretty darn useful stuff. And so this is just age by sex, measured in centimeters, and we can see as kids grow up, they get taller. There are 3 years where one sex is actually taller than the other. But it's very easy to see visually, right? This is a perfect example of where a 3D histogram is pretty darn useful. And using our clever technique we used in the previous example, we actually put the values of the difference down in the labels of each of these series, right? So we don't have to display it above. Another perhaps more worky example, again, using orderly data and a 3D histogram, and this is sort of real world, by month, some value related to UVs, walks, RLEs, and golf. And looking at this then, it's really easy to see, this is a good example, gosh, this value seems a little bit anomalous compared to all the rest, right? It just pops right out. And the same, I can't quite see this little hidden thing, RLE got really shy back in the month of September. This one instantly leaps out and say, gosh, this is useful. This is a comparison that I can instantly say, gosh, I can do something with this. I can learn something with this. However, I just want to warn you, don't use histograms when you have disorderly data. So this isn't real data. I just thought it would be fun. This might be, I don't know, people's scandals by month. The Kardashians, as you can see, because the data aren't orderly and consistent, it's impossible to garner much visually other than they're a flaming dumpster fire of a family. You can't gather much from this histogram. How we doing, Sam?
Fantastic. Documenting as we speak.
I will tell you,
She's going to right
that's why we're recording this. I was playing Bruno Mars. I was going to give you a good soundtrack before we started, and she's like, "Oh."
Did we buy that though?
You did great. You did great.
Yeah.
Everybody loves Gershwin. So let's talk about pie charts just a little bit. Oh, look, a copyrighted material. Let's just delete that. I'm sorry, Sam. I don't know what came over me. So this pie charts are evil. 3D pie charts are an abomination in the eyes of God and Globeco alike for a couple of obvious reasons. So Wayne, the third dimension of this pie chart tells us exactly what? Exactly, nothing. 3D pie charts are useless. It tells you nothing. It distorts your view of the data and it takes up space. Never use it. Your director will want you to because it looks pretty. Say, no, it's bad. They don't want you to. And the other reason pie charts generally are bad is it's very hard, unless it's really, really exact, to discern the difference. Say, Wayne, if you would tell me how much bigger Tarrant County is compared to Philadelphia County, visually, pie charts are extremely hard. I don't know what it is, the human eye or brain, to compare one slice to another. Even when it's a relatively simple example, we can't do it very well, right? For those reasons, I loathe pie charts. I highly recommend consider using histograms. Sometimes you want to do a horizontal one rather than vertical. But here, it's much easier to compare, say, hey look, Wayne County, yes, right in the middle, solid middle of the pack, reliable, compared to that boisterous LA County. It's pretty easy to make the comparison, right? Visually you can tell the difference. Okay, how are we doing for time? Good?
43.
Legally, we're on track. Awesome. I'll show you a couple of charting examples just because they're sort of fun and to give you ideas of things you can do that you might not have thought of. I realize a lot of us use dashboards, have to create dashboards, and often they're a mess. Not only do they contain pie charts, but a bunch of chart junk, or you have multiple pages and they're painful. So these are a couple of real world examples. My boss, Dan, prints this out. It fits on an 8.5 by 11. He goes in front of his boss and looks good every month. This is not so much to tell you about that. What I want to illustrate here, we tell the truth with the data as much as we can. So here's a dashboard. Again, I know it doesn't display well, but it shows lots and lots of charts. You can combine them onto one sheet. You note that we don't have a lot of junk. It doesn't look like a Christmas tree, just a few colors. It's easy to tell, for example, when we're above goal or below goal. Point number one. Point number two, and the thing that's useful about Excel, something you might not know is you can make charts transparent. And if you can make charts transparent, you can stack them on top of each other, and it looks like all one chart, as this example goes. Again, a way to cram a lot more data together than you normally can do. And so we can start, I can disassemble this thing a little bit, oops, maybe. And you can see this thing is actually comprised of multiple charts. Sorry, I'm not doing well dragging and dropping today. And multiple data elements. In addition, you can use things like chart series labels and put them, as long as all the other elements on the chart are invisible, it'll look like a piece of text. Like some of these are actually from a chart, but there's nothing present other than this series label. And the reason that's important is then you can reference data somewhere else that's updated every month, and you don't have to go in and manually type something. So remember, transparent charts, lay them on top of each other, do fun and exotic and unnatural things with your chart labels. Okay. I think we're still legal, and we're getting close to the end. One more example, again, a similar sort of thing, and I'm going to toggle out to the live version of this. So, okay, that display's okay. So this is an example, something, it's a sheet we actually used back in the olden days when we were called PCP rather than PSG. But again, a dashboard with multiple charts, multiple tables displayed each month with data. And again, not all that interesting other than the notion you can cram pretty useful data pretty close together and still have it be legible. The things I wanted to show you is right now you can use things called form controls to control the scope of the data we're seeing. So right now, for example, our R12 sales are 185 million because it's all of PCP. But I can use a form control to say, don't show me everything, show me just commercial mowing. And it takes a second, and then it'll drop this. So everything we see is just our commercial mowing portion of PSG right now, right? It's a way to sort of easily control the scope of the data you see and visualize. And we can go through the groups, and all these things change as well. So each of these is places where we've got bundles that are behaving well, behaving poorly, good turns, bad turns, low profit, high profit. So this is one use of form control with tables. The second use, and if any of you have done this already, I'll give you $1 at the end of the presentation. We used form control above to control the scope. So this drop down only shows bundles that are in commercial mowing under PCP. So we can change those around if we want and see. This allows us to drill in on a specific, if we had a question, somebody's having SVA profitability problems, we can sort of drill in and say, gosh, I look at this thing, it's got a 74% CP ratio, I sort of know what the problem is, right? Or I can look at this particular bundle's terms. Something else you can do with formula controls is this. And if any of you have ever done this, I'll give you $1. You can actually make it look like you have a chart that you can scroll across the months. So you can have like 7 years of data, it's only displaying 12, but using the formula control, you can actually walk back and forth across the months. And you can see our chart labels down here, these are dynamic. So every time we change the scope of that 12 months, the value of that 12 months changes as well. So you could do some pretty funky things in Excel with charts that you might not have realized you could pull off. Okay, and then lastly, and I know this is why you came here, make an Excel curse out loud. A little bit of a trick. So again, HR, bless your heart. I said to Sam, we should teach people to do this. She's like, yes. But a little bit, we rely on our knowledge of the English language
on enter.
in Excel, and indeed in any Microsoft Office application. You can turn on text-to-speech, and so this is a thing called Speak Cells on Enter, and I just enabled it, and the instructions are in here. But when you do this,
may you work for Globeco for 1,000 years.
Curse you, Wayne. Oh, wait a second, we should customize this. Wayne.
Wayne, may you work for Globeco.
All right.
I will give you the appropriate.
You can do it in Excel. You can do it in Excel.
Sam, turn that thing off.
Okay. Lastly, in defense of our colleagues, I know we're going to run back. Don't curse out your manager or anybody. That's probably inappropriate. Okay, so that concludes. Gosh, we did it faster than I thought. That concludes our content for today. May 10th, we will do a more advanced session of this. So again, a lot more charting and data presentation, because that's my favorite thing in the world. We'll do friends with net benefits. I will teach you how to put something on your phone to help you avoid the Cary police. I'm not even kidding. So any questions before you curse me out? Observations? I hope this was useful. If you didn't learn something you didn't know before, please raise your hand and I'll give you $1 and apologize. Good. I hope this makes your days a little faster. Thank you all for coming.